So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Neil Kaufman, class of '81. A little bit about Neil. He's the managing member of Kaufman & Associates, LLC, Corporate and Securities Counsel to the legal cannabis industry. So Neil combines 33 years of practicing corporate and securities law at the highest levels with extensive cannabis industry experience, and he'll speak to that. And his topic for this evening is current cannabis investment and legal challenges. And I hand it off to Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Good evening and welcome. Thank you to the Binghamton University Alumni Association for inviting me here tonight. My name is Neil Kaufman, SUNY Binghamton class of 1981. That's a long time ago. It is only fitting that I share with you tonight what I have learned about cannabis with fellow alumni of Binghamton, the very place I have to thank for so much of my formative cannabis experience. You may notice that I will, throughout my talk tonight, mostly use the term cannabis, not marijuana, pot, weed, grass, reefer, or other slang terminology. That is a very strong preference in the industry. It refers to the smokable or now processable flower that we popularly call marijuana, as well as to its close genetic cousin hemp. As the cannabis industry is professionalizing, and did I really just refer to a cannabis industry? We much prefer using the proper terminology, and you will soon understand why. For over 10,000 years, ancient cultures in China, India, Persia, and elsewhere have used cannabis for a variety of medical and industrial purposes. Numerous ancient texts refer to cannabis, including uses for rheumatism, menstrual problems, inflammation, cataracts, glaucoma, cancer, leprosy, for a variety of other reasons. In the book of Exodus, cannabis, referred to as cannabosem, was purportedly one of the ingredients contained in the holy anointing oil passed from the God of the Bible to Moses. So these contentions that cannabis has no medical use, as you can see, are pretty well unfounded. The Venetian Republic, the first European empire to emerge from the Dark Ages, industrialized around processing hemp into rope, sails, and fine linen-like cloth. Britain became the industrial Goliath of Western Europe, in large part due to its exploitation of hemp for its merchant and naval fleets. British kings mandated hemp cultivation by domestic farmers, immigrants, and early American colonists. While the father of our country, George Washington, was trying to breed high THC hemp at Mount Vernon, Martha made the first American flag from hemp cloth. Thomas Jefferson also grew hemp and smoked it for his migraines. James Madison is reported to have stated that sweet hemp, get the euphemism there, gave him the insight to create a new and democratic nation, the father of our Constitution. Beginning in the 1830s, cannabis-based products like Squire's extract and Tilden's extract became popular medications in this country. By 1850, the United States Pharmacopoeia listed cannabis as a treatment for many conditions, including convulsions. Also by about 1850, hemp had dropped from being the most popular crop in America to third most commonly grown, behind only slave economy-driven cotton and tobacco. By the latter half of the 19th century, every pharmaceutical company in America was busy manufacturing cannabis-based patented cures, including E.R. Squibb, Park Davis, and Eli Lilly. There's a widely circulated quote from Abraham Lincoln to the effect that two of my favorite things are sitting on my front porch smoking a pipe of sweet hemp and playing my harmonica. Now, there is admittedly a scholarly debate over whether he ever actually said or wrote that, but that's just too great a quote to ignore. America's cannabis fad lasted from the mid-1800s into the 20th century. Alas, like all good things, such as our college years in Binghamton, you knew this had to end. By the 1930s, several anti-cannabis dynamics were dangerously at play. Harry Anslinger is the man most responsible for the American anti-cannabis laws. He was an anti-corruption bureaucrat who actually started out pro-cannabis. However, as Prohibition ended in 1933, he realized that heroin and cocaine were not enough to support his department. He was the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, the predecessor of the FBI. So he began to aggressively advocate a nationwide ban on the evil weed. He authored sensationalist articles, eagerly published, by the 28 newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst, whose vertically integrated business empire had substantial timber interests that could be harmed by hemp. Hearst had his newspapers drop the term cannabis and use only marijuana in order to associate cannabis with unpopular Mexican immigrants. There were also rumors that the DuPont chemical family, whose company invented nylon around this time, sought to undermine hemp competition by supporting this anti-cannabis wave. Anslinger especially liked to cite the story of Victor Licata, who supposedly massacred his entire family because he was a marijuana smoker. As it turned out, Licata had a serious mental illness and did not use cannabis. But those kind of details never stopped Anslinger. When 29 out of 30 pharmacists and drug reps objected to his proposals to ban cannabis, he discarded the 29 objectors and repeatedly cited the single biased dissenter. Now, why would an otherwise upstanding civil servant act like this? Well, this is quite clearly explained in Anslinger's own words. Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. The satanic music, jazz, and swing of Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers result from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. Those are his words, not mine, for the record. Now, most of us have heard about the anti-cannabis propaganda film Reefer Madness. And if you bear with me for a moment here, I will figure out how to navigate to the video. This is the trailer from the film.
In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity.
The result of this hysteria was the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. The MTA imposed licensing, registration, and stamp tax requirements that effectively made cannabis illegal. Anslinger drafted it in secret. Few congressional hearings were held, and many congressmen knew little about it, nor had they read the bill. Do any of these tactics sound familiar nowadays? The AMA, the New York Academy of Medicine, and most doctors opposed the MTA, but nothing could stop Anslinger and his merry band of fools. He continued his anti-cannabis campaign through the 1950s, encouraging Congress to impose ever stricter sentences on marijuana. Finally, in 1969, the U.S. Supreme Court in Leary versus the United States, yes, that Timothy Leary, struck down the MTA, but the reprieve did not last long. In 1970, the Nixon administration passed the Controlled Substances Act, which defined marijuana very broadly and placed it under the most restrictive Schedule I, along with heroin and LSD, for drugs that have no accepted medical use. This was supposed to be just temporary, subject to further research to be conducted by the Schaefer Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse created by the Act. Well, the Schaefer Commission found that marijuana was essentially harmless, and Nixon went into a panic to manipulate its findings. Failing that, he rejected the findings in their entirety, leaving cannabis stuck in Schedule I, where it remains today. And the saddest part of that is the reason. This is a quote from top Nixon aide John Ehrlichman. You want to know what this was really about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or to be black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. In the Watergate tapes, Nixon blames it all on Jewish psychiatrists out to get him. Amazing. Since then, even the federal government has often acknowledged the actual benefits of cannabis, including by subsidizing cannabis treatment for at least 15 medical patients, filing a 1999 patent extolling the virtues of cannabis as a neuroprotectant, and in 1998, even a DEA administrative law judge found that cannabis constitutes a treatment for several medical conditions and is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. In 1996, largely through the efforts of gay rights activists fighting the AIDS epidemic, California became the first state to legalize medical cannabis. Currently, 29 states and the District of Columbia have legalized cannabis for medical use, and 8 states have legalized recreational use, in addition to DC. All but 2 states permit CBD. Cannabis legalization is spreading worldwide. 62% of Americans live in states that permit cannabis, but it is still illegal under federal law. The US Justice Department had to eventually react, and under President Obama it did. In 2013, it issued what we call the Cole Memo, which guided US attorneys not to prosecute unless 8 federal law enforcement priorities are implicated. The Cole Memo remains as one of the primary backstops of the entire US cannabis industry. Unfortunately, the DEA has remained hostile to cannabis, only removing inflammatory references to cannabis from its website in 2017. And only in 2017 did the FDA admit for the first time that CBD has beneficial effects. Most state law changes to cannabis laws have been accomplished through voter referendums rather than legislative action. In every state that has legal rec, it has been accomplished at the ballot box. Ultimately, the only solution to the federal law problem is Congress, as scary as that is. Rescheduling cannabis down to Schedule 2 or lower will not solve the problem because any scheduled drug must be approved by the FDA, and any substance which claims to treat an ailment is a drug. Cannabis with multiple strains and chemical permutations is not one chemical that can go through an FDA approval process, even if someone could finance it. If cannabis were rescheduled, the FDA would just go around shutting down all the medical cannabis companies. The only solution is for Congress to pass a special law and regulatory regime for this special plant, similar to what it did for tobacco and dietary supplements. Until that happens, who would have thought that the savior of the US cannabis industry would be crackpot Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who has co-sponsored annual riders to federal budget bills prohibiting the DOJ from spending any money to prosecute folks that are in compliance with state medical marijuana laws. Federal courts have relied on that to stop prosecutions in their tracks. The 2000 Farm Bill authorized low THC industrial hemp. As a result, finally, domestically grown hemp is available under state pilot programs, which about 30 states have, and interstate transportation of that hemp is now permitted. One of the questions I get asked all the time is CBD legal? Many companies in the industry claim that it is totally legal. It is not. That is not the case. The DEA totally disagrees. CBD remains a gray area. The cannabis industry has grown to over $6.7 billion in 2016 revenues, with over $50 billion projected by 2026, and has provided 150,000 American jobs. Many states have become dependent on their cannabis revenues. This industry is no longer about joints and bongs. While flower is still king, the fastest growing products are edibles and vapor oils. These products, as well as where permitted flower and pre-rolls, what we used to call loose joints, are available for delivery in many cities within 30 minutes. Can you imagine if we had that back in college? It's no wonder this is the fastest growing industry in America. Industry growth is still inhibited by several factors that have limited scalability, requiring replication of infrastructure on a state-by-state basis. Many cannabis companies have problems with banking, as you probably mostly heard, especially cultivators and dispensaries, and severe tax burdens under Internal Revenue Code Section 280E crush the net profit margins in the industry. As if all these challenges were not enough, prices have now collapsed. Cannabis business owners can no longer get away with loosely managing their business. Fortunately, the impending commencement of legal rec in California is a game changer that should allow that intrastate industry to get so big as to finally achieve some measure of scalability. Meanwhile, Wall Street hasn't seen a growth industry like this since the 1990s internet boom. In fact, probably the most common question I get asked is, which cannabis stock should I buy? There are over 300 cannabis stocks publicly traded in North America, including 36 companies listed on the North American Marijuana Index shown on this slide. Yes, there really is a North American Marijuana Index. However, only 2 of those companies are listed on the US exchange. The vast majority are traded on the pink sheets, what we used to call the pink sheets, the OTC markets, and only about a dozen of them have annual revenues of about $10 million or more. Their lofty valuations are often based on thinly traded illiquid markets, which is a fertile opportunity for pump and dump schemes, which we've also seen, so let the buyer beware. For many of the real companies, valuations are very high, including in the Canadian market. As we have seen, cannabis has a long history. In emerging from its recent American black market doldrums, we have seen exponential growth. We are now at the end of the beginning stage of the rebirth of the US cannabis industry. With increasing legal acceptance, more professional management, and robust investor interest, we can expect to see a rapidly maturing and profitable industry bring in economic growth, good investment opportunities, and most importantly, the enormous health benefits of this plant to the American people at the end of this long and winding road.